Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to give folks some time to join the webinar. If you're looking for migrating to the cloud at scale with JFrog, Fidelity's story, you're in the right place with the right folks. I'm just going to give one more minute. I see people trickling in here. In the meantime, let's just have a quick informal discussion. I am Melissa McKay. We'll formally introduce ourselves in a bit, but I'm coming to you from Denver. So really excited to talk with Gerard. Gerard, where are you at right now?
Hey, Melissa, I'm in Galway on the west coast of Ireland.
Wow, cool.
So a lot of miles between us.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here because this is a really interesting discussion. And I'm excited to talk with you today about this. First of all, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Melissa McKay. I'm a developer advocate with JFrog. I've been a developer advocate now for about 3.5 years. And part of this position, I get the pleasure of meeting incredible folks like Gerard and others in the field. I run into you at conferences. We have good discussions about our products, about our technology under the covers and the future of things. Always exciting to talk with Gerard. And with that, let's go ahead and introduce Gerard, head of ALM Tools and Platforms at Fidelity. Gerard, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for taking the time to come here, myself and Melissa, and for an opportunity for me to share our Fidelity story. So I head up a group called what's called ALM Tools and Platforms as part of our cloud and platform engineering group. And my responsibilities lie around how do I help developers write their code? How do I help developers build, test, verify their code? And how do we help developers deploy that safely and securely into production? So all of the tool chain that goes across that and all of the other capabilities that we might create in order to, expedite the process of building code, reducing risk or taking risk out, and obviously trying to provide a great developer experience around that.
All right, well, today we have a packed agenda. We're going to just do like a Q&A kind of interview style talk about Fidelity's and migration story to the cloud, your journey, the broader strategy behind the decisions that you've made and the process that you chose, best practices, perhaps your priorities that you considered when you were in the middle of all of this movement. And then, of course, challenges. I think that'll be a pretty interesting part of the talk for sure. And then what you're currently doing about security. That's always an interesting topic these days, especially with everything that continues to come into the media, the things that we need to protect ourselves with as organizations and as individual developers as well. So today, all of you that have joined, if you have any questions that pop up during this period, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll try to address them today. If not, we'll reach out to you after. All right. I am going to stop sharing and just to have an informal conversation. First of all, for those of you who don't know what has happened or why myself and Jer are even speaking today, would you tell us just a little bit about what brought you here, what this whole cloud migration subject is about for you at Fidelity?
Yeah. So a number of years ago, we're again a financial services organization that has been around for many number of years, and technology has always been core and at the heart of the business. So way back when the original Mr. Johnson founded the company, it passed down into our previous chairman, Mr. Johnson again, and now his daughter Abby Johnson. they've always invested in technology. They've always looked at technology as a way to be the core of the business and really as a thing we could drive innovation. So we can deliver phenomenal services, brilliant products to all of our customers, and and really to try and make Fidelity the number one place of choice for people who might want to come to invest, to safeguard their financial future, provide their healthcare, and our organizations who also want to manage those aspects as well for all their employees. So that's where we strive to, to position Fidelity. So we had, we back in 1965, they had their first computer. They had the internet in the middle of the 90s, and in 2016 we actually started experimenting with the cloud. While a lot of groups or businesses or organizations or enterprise back then might have looked at cloud as a kind of exit your data center type thing, it's a cost play for reducing your data center costs or your operational costs. For us, it wasn't. It was really about how do we access new technology at an accelerated rate, so we could build on top of those technologies. We can adapt those technologies to provide products and services for our customers. And I think that was the primary function for us, was that ability. And over the years between now and today, so we had one cloud first. We were experimenting with kind of applications, and then we started moving into more, let's start productionizing some of these experiments and getting real life applications in, and learning and growing as we, discover and as we learn along that journey. And, we went into hybrid cloud a number of years ago, and now we have about, I think we're close on 60 to 70% of our application portfolio in the cloud. And with a view to having the vast majority of that completed by maybe the end of 25 or 26.
Yeah. So something that's always interesting to me is, I've worked with Fidelity a lot, but never as a technology company. It's always been personal to me, right? I've worked with Fidelity with employee benefits or with getting advice on my investments. And I think today we really take for granted what actually needs to happen under the covers to get all of these services out there and available to the customers. So you touched on this a little bit, but you said it was 2019 was when you started moving to the cloud. Was that right? Did I get that?
Yeah, 2016 is when we our first, and then 2019 we had our hybrid strategy. So how do we look across different cloud providers and look to where best to position our workload based on what we're looking to achieve with those applications.
Okay. And you have several applications that are involved. We're not talking just one website, right?
We're looking at, I think the number is, it's over 6,500 applications. That's the way we designate them sitting on the cloud right now.
Yeah. Again, I think we take this for granted with bigger companies realizing how much is actually going on under the covers. In the past, in my development career, I've also gone through this journey of moving to the cloud. And in my situation, I don't know that we had, I think it's something we thought we needed to do, but we didn't really have, a real driver for it. So I'm curious with Fidelity specifically, can you give us a little more detail on what exact problems were you experiencing that made you make this decision to move to the cloud?
Well, yeah. So if you think about, and you can't get away with cost. And again, cost is a primary, consideration as you're adopting cloud. How do you have a very successful FinOps practice? So that's actually one of the things we did at the very beginning, was establish a FinOps practice around our cloud migration. So be able to manage that bubble. And also when you're on the cloud is, how do you be, financially responsible? Because cloud bills can add up pretty quickly if you don't have good cloud practices and FinOps practices based into your cloud automation and your ongoing hygiene during the day, right? I always saw there was a great quote once I saw is a great application in the cloud has always been as small as they can be whenever needed. So always focus on how small you can make your application at any moment in time, and that should be able then to serve your, the demands, the needs of whoever's using that application at that moment in time. But it wasn't about technology for technology. Kind of, we can take this application, we're going to do a refactor, re-architecture, lift and shift, and move it onto essentially a different set of compute in the cloud. It was more around how do we achieve business objectives. So, for example, Fidelity have call centers, so people can call into Fidelity and they get a human being, and really the cloud has helped us, one, be able to scale the infrastructure for those particular things, because if we're always trying to be as small as we can be at any moment in time, then we obviously have to be able to scale up and scale down as demand needs. So using the elasticity of the cloud was obviously a huge benefit for the organization, but also tapping into technology. So we're able to accelerate things. So when you call in, how do we, one, what does that phone experience look like? What's the technology you use? And how does that connect to all of your information that Fidelity might know? So rather than you having to say your name, like we had to introduce ourselves earlier, what happens if you call in and your customer profile is there in front of the representative who can actually, who's positioned to answer the call, because the context of how you come into that call was passed along with it. So if you were on, your benefits screen, you would have a benefits expert, or if you were on an investment screen, you would get a different person. So we're able to route you correctly to the right person in the first time, and provide that phenomenal experience.
Excellent. Yeah, I think what you described, a lot of the benefits that most organizations want when they decide to make that jump to the cloud, that whole scalability. You touched on cost effectiveness, that you need to be very careful. And I'm wondering if there's anything behind that. Do you have any trial and error stories that you can share with us? Because I love hearing the success stories at the end, but even more interesting to me is how you got there to begin with and what traps you might have fallen into along the way.
Yeah, I think so when you start off first, and then it's maybe no big surprise, but the cloud providers make it very easy for you to provision, make it very easy to get access to different services, products and services that they offer, and then very quickly you're able to spin that up, and then the clock, the meter starts ticking on those services. And so and some services cost more than other. You have many regions in which you can create services, and again, even within those regions, there might be different pricing from those cloud providers. So if you're not careful, developers are very good at creating things. They're not maybe as good as keeping their own house clean as maybe they should, and taking and tearing things down. So I think what you find is people start just creating new and experiment and playing trial under development. And then they kind of say, okay, we got all that. And then they go back and they start developing their application. But in the meantime, all of the testing, the playing, the experimentation, all those cloud resources are still continuing to run, and they're continuing to generate invoices and billing. So it's billing meters. So and that can get very expensive very quickly. So what we figured at the beginning is, when we quickly realized that you get your first monthly bill, it might be on the larger side, or you're wondering what is all this. So putting a rigor around FinOps as a practice, and also then building automation. So we've created a lot of automation to say, hey, if you're an internal application for employees, and we're in Monday to Friday, then why does the application run on out of hours or run over the weekend? So building that automation into our FinOps practices, that we can actually shut down, start up applications, so to make sure that when they're not needed, they're not creating billing, and when they are needed, that they're ready and up and running. So again, it's so some of those are the things we learned, but yeah, the more I think one of the fortunate things we did is we had a slow journey at the beginning. So we didn't say to every the 17,000 Fidelity technologists, there's the cloud, off you go. It was kind of through different teams to kind of gain feedback and learn at a small scale first, so you're not kind of experiencing any scale challenges if you do it too quickly, too early, and trying to clean up 17,000 things is much more difficult than a handful of things.
Right. That's a really important point that you brought up. And I'm just thinking like how different things were in 2016 as compared to now, right? So even if you starting slow, you're doing this a little bit at a time, there's been massive improvements in the services that are being offered now as well. So hopefully you at Fidelity have also been able to benefit from that. It sounds like you have.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a constant. Change is the only thing that we know, right? And even if you look like 1 year to the next year, the pace of change, the pace of innovation, the accessibility of things that weren't available, just 12 months ago is phenomenal. And so exciting to work in technology. I think it's a hugely exciting time. It's how do you balance the constant emergence of new technology with your kind of to meet your business outcomes and continue to deliver for your customers, right? I think you can take your eye off and constantly be chasing the technology versus making sure you're serving your customers.
I have a very kind of a specific question for you.
Yeah.
You started going down like a strategy, in talking about that, starting small, starting with
Yeah.
maybe one application, maybe one team, getting some feedback there. Very valuable information, especially for those of you who have not started this journey yet. Maybe you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls that those of us that have done it through trial and error have gone through. But I've been in a situation in the past. You've mentioned developers are very good at creating, not so good at cleaning up. So obviously that is a trial and error, realizing, how easy it is to create stuff in the cloud and to make it accessible to everybody, but then also paying attention to the cost of that. Do you have, as far as strategy, did you ever develop like a platform engineering team or anything that would help your development teams and projects just kind of standardize on a particular path to get into the cloud?
It's like you read my mind. Yeah. So we started out with like a cloud group. As I said, the group we work for now is called actually Cloud and Platform Engineering. We were called Cloud. We were just a cloud computing group. Just a few years ago, up to a few years ago. And the original journey was about how do we create that pathway, that set of automation for people to onboard to the cloud. Right. So it was mainly about an onboarding experience and making sure we made all of the products and services available, versus having an opinionation of what happened when you got there. So when you arrive when the team arrives in the cloud, then it was kind of like, here's the menu of products and services. And I think when you and that's absolutely a must, right? I don't think you can start in any other way. But I think you realize as you scale out through the organization, as you scale your adoption, you find a lot of repetitiveness and a lot of duplication being required at the technology layers or the application layer, not first. And and there's a lot of work for developers to create infrastructure. There's a lot of work for developers to try to do security, test all this, be multi-region, multiple AZs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's huge a volume of work that's part of being in the cloud that developers and teams didn't necessarily have to do in a previous life. So we did so as you scaled. That starts becoming a challenge for any organization, and you spend more time on technology work versus business work, which is not going to make your customers happy. So therefore, yeah, so we then shifted into the platform engineering as well. So we said is how do we offer platforms to those teams? So if you want to deploy an application to the cloud and it's a web application, for example, why should you have to pick it? Do I use Lambdas? Do I use EC2s? Or if you're on Amazon, do I use Kubernetes? Do I use the cloud version of their container services? Or all of these other options that are available to you. So kind of standardize on platforms is a way we've looked to help achieve scale and achieve velocity in going to the cloud. And I think that's the natural progression.
In the beginning, when you just started having teams, come on board and go through this process, did you have any I don't want to say arguments, but sometimes there can be a little bit of friction between a platform team and maybe, development teams themselves, especially if they have, brand new ideas. They want to try new services, maybe that you're not ready to support yet. I'm curious if you have anything currently where, if someone has a novel idea, do you have like a formal process that teams go through in order to get that included within the, allowed set of resources and that teams can use?
Yeah, I think it's so we try to set up you can't platforms by definition really provide an opinionation. And and especially if you have an integrated platform of platforms, you can really provide an accelerated way for people to go to cloud. But there's a huge amount of standardization and opinionation built into what that is. But you also got to promote innovation and promote ideation and promote experimentation. And as I said, these new cloud services are coming around very, very fast. There's people innovating on innovations and they're innovating on those innovations. So there's such a fast cycle here that it's impossible for anyone, to be honest, to keep up. So you've got to make sure you provide that flexibility where you allow teams experiment and have maybe it's a sandbox environment where you can have access to all of the services in a lockdown model, but still allow you experiment and play with those technologies and try to then understand is. But the one thing we try to ask people is like, it's not technology for technology, it's how can that technology enable our business? So if we can provide that environment where they can iterate and they can experiment, safely and securely, hugely important, then we get the best of both worlds. And then we look at, if application teams find value and benefit in using those services, then if those things get adopted by a bigger and broader set of application teams at Fidelity, maybe then it's time to say, oh, maybe we need to platform this to scale it across the entire organization and get benefit of platform engineering teams to offer scale. So I think it's that constant healthy cycle of incubating, trying out, and then ultimately if you need to, then scaling it out.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you guys you're on top of it with all of these strategies.
We try, but developers love technology, right? That's the joy. So it's how do you allow them to do that? But still, we want them focusing on our customers, not necessarily focusing on just technology.
Right. Well, let's talk about some other strategies. Starting small, making sure that you have a feedback loop, incorporating a platform engineering team, some standardization across the organization. These are good strategies. Are there any others that you can think of that someone needs, would consider implementing?
Yeah. So one of the so we talked about, again, you talked about platforms and maybe the friction that might have with the rest of a development organization. So one of the strategies we've tried to do is adopt the open source model within the platform model. So if your platform, even if you're offering something, if it's not locked down to the outside and maybe you're not tolerable or you're not open to feedback and contributions, then I think adoption or acceptance is a much more difficult thing to achieve. So we've adopted the open source, so we have a full inner source model within our organization where all our code bases are open to everybody in the organization to look at, read. And if someone has something they want to contribute, they can, or if they're blocked because there's a missing feature, they can actually go contribute that. And we've had huge success in, and that again just changes people's perception of what these things are and what they're not. And I think if they're open and transparent and people are able to work with each other, then I think you generate that community with that open source kind of collaborative, accepting community inside your own organization.
Yeah, lots of advantages there. I am definitely a cheerleader for open source, of course. Being able to consume it as an organization is, extremely valuable. And often, sometimes I hear, well, it's free. It's a way to get, free stuff. But we do have to remember it's free as in a free puppy, right? So
Yes, yes,
there are
correct.
responsibilities of the organizations if you're consuming the open source to also contribute as well. And on that note, a couple of things went flying through my mind there. So how involved is Fidelity with the open source community? Do you have regular committers?
We do. When my current boss, when he came into the role, probably close, just 3.5 or 4.5 years ago, he kind of said we wanted to be more in the open source world. So if you wanted to practice that, community and that model within your own organization, I think you have to be kind of, how do you learn? How do you know what that is if you're not out there yourself, right? Other than that, you're kind of creating something that's unique to you, but how do you know that's actually the right thing or not? So yeah, so we started contributing to open source. So we have a first committers program here. So my first commit. So we have a kind of we have an OSPO, but we also have in our engineering groups, we have kind of developer advocates, for lack of a better word, or people who champion and support the open source community. And they guide them through the process in Fidelity of how do you contribute to a project and work with people to go through that process and do my first commit. And then and that kind of helps build the kind of the program itself, right? To how do you go out there and now looking at, well, what are core open source programs that Fidelity are leveraging, and how do we make those, add features, add enhancements to those programs in the open source community versus either trying to fork down, a copy and then having a private copy. You're trying to maintain the synchronize between the two, or which never works. So yeah, so we're trying now to be out in the community. So we've identified key strategic projects that we leverage, and and then becoming part of the community for those projects.
I admire your organization for doing that, for supporting that effort. I also think very important, very valuable, and it's just a win-win on all sides.
It's
If
a
you're able
huge win
to.
because you get to learn from so many other people, right? And you get to hear other people's the way they think and everything. So you just like, it's not even just about the code, right? Or whether it's, because there's open source is a much more rigor, I think, on quality and testing, and because you're not meeting a deadline per se for delivery for production date, right? So I think there's a much more healthier way of collaborating and communicating around the code. But I think then just interacting with other humans,
Yeah.
I think you learn so much more as well as a human being, and just becoming a better person and a better developer.
Yeah. A lot of it can be really inspiring because it's
Mm,
easy to get into the silo of your own business needs and objectives. And I mean, of course, those are important, but sometimes the more inspirational things and things that result in innovation within your organization can come with, having these relationships with folks outside of your organization.
absolutely.
Well, I definitely want to circle back to that again. But first, I just want to pause for a moment and just remind our audience, if you have any specific questions or anything that you'd like to ask Jer while he's here, please feel free to do so. Just type it in the Q&A and I'll keep an eye on it. And then I want to come back to cloud migration. And I have another specific question here. You mentioned you have thousands of apps, and I can only imagine not all of them belong in the cloud. Do you have any suggestions or any horror stories perhaps of maybe finding that an application really doesn't belong there or isn't benefiting as it should?
Yes, I think you'll yeah, so that is a very good question, and I think there's no actually one answer to this question. I think there's many different strategies, I think, or many different use cases of why or what might happen. But yeah, we still have applications on premise, and we may always continue to have applications on premise for kind of a variety of different reasons. But one of the things we did learn was that lifting and shifting to the cloud is not a strategy. And it's not an answer. So I think what we've done is where we may have looked at some of those things, and it's take an application that might run on premise on some VM somewhere, trying to just containerize it and run it in a containerized runtime. Does that work? Yes or no? So we've looked at, do we look at re-architecting some of these applications to be either cloud friendly or cloud native, and leave the other application continue to serve what it is, and then deploy your new application, and even you can, and then it looks to shift your customers from old to new, and just let the old data center on premise one, die out naturally. So I think that's definitely one of the strategies we're looking at. There are certain things that you lift and shift, but then technology changes so quickly. You get containerized, and then you get Kubernetes comes around, and then it's serverless, and it's all these other things. So it's so I think having more agility in your application code allows you pivot and move much more quicker with the advent and the availability of new technology. So to be that, you have to be cloud native. You can't be a legacy application just happening to be running in the cloud. So yeah, so we're trying to look at that, as well as just how do we build agility into our applications, and so we can have agility with those applications when new technologies arrive, and bring them into the app, right? So again, to make new and phenomenal services available to the customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see you probably have, a big portion of any new app development, you'd want to consider this at the beginning, right? Making sure that, it can go cloud native when and if needed. What if it's like any of your legacy applications? Are there any that are, particularly difficult, or that you've had to rethink or maybe even rewrite in order to make it possible to get them into the cloud?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, I think some of them we still run we still have mainframes that run our big backend processes, again, like many a financial institution or bank. You're not necessarily going to move them to a mainframe on the cloud. So how do you look at how do you transform transform and modernize the functionality capabilities into a cloud native application? Again, some applications are written for desktops. The thick lines, right? So some of them, and they might have third-party dependencies and other vendor dependencies. So you're not you maybe not fully in control of your ability to modernize and transform those applications. So it might be, again, a longer or a slower journey. And then you just have applications that were written and they work perfectly great, right? They do exactly what they says in the thing, and they might have been written, a decade or so ago, and you might have C++, you might have all kind of Windows type applications, and then you look at, what should they look like in the cloud, and be more, not targeted to a specific runtime, but be able to run anywhere. And so we look at kind of taking the opportunity now to rewrite those ones as they're there, because sometimes they can be very difficult to move to the cloud.
Right.
They might seem simple, and some cloud providers provide kind of frameworks or kind of places that can host them, but then you're kind of locked into just whatever that kind of thing is, right? Container is, but you don't have access to all the rest of what's going on the cloud. So so I think I don't think that seems to have served us well or anywhere else. So I think it is, how do we just become truly modern in the cloud?
Yeah. We do have a question from the audience. It's going to take us into another direction. So I will ask it. But before, I just have one other one for you. Something that I've struggled with in the past with teams is, we may build our application for the cloud, but one of the helpful parts that like our platform engineering team had to be thoughtful about was not getting locked into a particular cloud provider. Is that a priority at all for when you develop your applications? Do you pick and choose services that you can, you're not locked in?
Yeah, I think it's an intriguing question that every organization mulls over or kind of thinks about. I think if you try to be, personally speaking, I think if you try to be truly abstract and cloud agnostic, I think the cost of those applications and your velocity of your time to markets would be much slower. And again, you'd probably have to narrow your technology that you can avail of to be able to operate that way. Um, the other way then is obviously you go all into a cloud, and the other extreme is you go all in and you're kind of embedded into that and the products and services. And again, I think if you're a small organization or a startup or something, that's probably the practical thing to do, right? And the logical thing to do and the right thing to do. In the middle, then you have, is it like we like the term, or like the term cloud portable. So you may not be agnostic, but you can port your cloud. So how do you architect and how do you create your application to it being independent, but being able to use those. So if you have a modular architecture, microservice architecture, you can still have your core code. It's written in a language, you maybe deploy it to a serverless and this or that, but then you're only looking at, it's only the infrastructure as code is swap it out. And if you use something maybe like Terraform, that might be an easier journey to deploy that infrastructure, in one cloud versus the other cloud, and your application then after it. If you're looking at Kubernetes, for example, and you stay closer to the open source, Kubernetes environment, and you run in the cloud's managed service for Kubernetes, then again, the actual effort to port your application code itself to one runtime versus another runtime is actually relatively straightforward, and it's just the automation that needs to be specific for one cloud and the other cloud.
Totally makes sense. I know I've been with organizations in the past that, they really benefited from some of the managed services. So you mentioned Kubernetes, and right away I remember, attempts at trying to manage our own Kubernetes cluster, how successful that was for us. And that sometimes, depending on costs and your resources and the benefits to the business, sometimes it's just, very, it's a good decision to choose a managed service.
Yeah, as you said, you just highlighted there's such a number of factors, right, to take into, and sometimes, you could make one decision and make a different decision for another different use case, right? And that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the most important thing I think our audience can get from just that little conversation is moving to the cloud is not always, it's not just a end all be all decision that everyone should make for every type of application. And then choosing a cloud particular provider may make more sense in some cases than others. Okay, let's move to this question from Lewis McNinch. The ask is, how do you keep the delicate balance between your DevOps community and your peers in DevSecOps and AppSec as you continue your journey to the cloud? So now we're going to talk about security a little bit. That's a whole nother topic. I think we can probably spend the rest of this session talking about this. But the rest of the question is, do you see it improving, or has it been more challenging now?
So it's a great question. And I can see, like, I've got a twin. So my twin is AppSec, right? And I think that's the kind of relationship we've created over time, and it's taken time, right? Because I think AppSec traditionally came from a different model, a different kind of way of working, right? Securing the firm, securing security when you had data centers was done very differently and operated very differently than you try to secure, the cloud or secure applications in the cloud. And I think in the world of, the way threats can come in on the cloud, you can have threats on the developer's desktop, you can have them in the build machines, you can have them through the running applications in the cloud, if there's any weaknesses. So the amount of things you have to do. So I think it becomes it can't be a community effort, because developers aren't security experts, right? So we've essentially joined forces with AppSec, even though they're a separate organization, but we partner, we work very closely, we have huge amounts of overlaps. We actually host some of the AppSec infrastructure and tooling that they use, and we're the platform admins, and they're the security managers that sit on top of these tools. So we really try and work in conjunction with each other. And again, and a simple example might be of where the benefits of this all pay off if you do build those partnerships and relationships. Even if I take something like Artifactory and X-Ray, for example, so developers want to download the latest and greatest and of open source. We know that the open source is one of the number one access points for threats and vulnerabilities. So how do you allow developers download whatever they want, but you ensure that you're scanning and gating that download to make sure it's secure, doesn't contain any vulnerabilities, doesn't contain any malicious code. So the partnership is us working together to, okay, we can host this, we can route all our language dependencies out to Artifactory, we can security create policies and curation within the X-Ray, and then now together we've provided developers a secure way to access open source without friction. And if anything goes wrong, then the system kind of gives the feedback saying this thing is blocked, or this thing's not available, or this thing's gone to review due to A, B, or C. So that's the kind of, I think, healthy environment you can get. But it takes work, and it does take work, and it takes both teams growing. Might be coming from different starting points, but as we work together to get ourselves to the same place, then I think that relationship can thrive.
Yeah. Well, of course, here at JFrog, we love this use case. We love this story that you have, because I think, us as a company, as a DevOps company going into security, we definitely, pride ourselves in being able to make this an easier process for our customers. And Fidelity, I can only imagine, only because I know how much of my information is with you guys. The worry, there's a high bar that you have to meet, right, as far as security. So make sure that you have all of these tools and processes in place to protect, not only your organization, but all of your customers that use you. We hear about like data breaches every day now in the media, right? Like, these are all things that are top of mind for a lot of us. And so having these tool sets to be able to put in place to make sure that your, developers and your applications are all, behaving in a secure manner, super important.
It's the most important thing.
Yes. I have given a talk in several places now, and the title is Developers Are Not Security Experts. So what you say about, having a twin, having, this team that recognizes that and focuses on this problem, and also looks for tools that don't so much get in a developer's way, but enhance the developer experience and help protect them, I think is wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I think security tooling and with things that we might put in this tool chain have come a long way in the last number of years. That before there might have been things you had to integrate out with that left the developer flow, so they were kind of external to everything, but you still had to use them. Whereas now integrating them into the developer workflow and having it be like just another development thing, or another way we can automate and just be part of the kind of underlying platform that developers use, makes that easier. And so I think, so a huge amount has come with those tools to become much more native to the developer experience and much more native to the developer workflow. And I think that's and if you use them correctly, then I think it's a huge benefit to everybody.
Oh, you hit on something almost painful for me, painful memories. If you use them correctly, this is so true. I had a conversation recently with someone, and the conversation was more along the lines of, it gets in the developer's way, having all of these policies in place and preventing developers from downloading what they want to download, how frustrating that can be. And I was very happy to be able to talk about some of the new tools that, JFrog and along with X-ray, some of the advanced security tools are helping with this. And I hope to see this improve across the industry. But one of the biggest complaints that I hear is there's so many CVEs. There's a database full of these vulnerabilities that are known, and they're all labeled. They're all labeled with a certain score. How risky you are if you bring in a certain package that has a CVE, but not all of it is applicable to you. It may not be applicable to your team, maybe not applicable to the developer. So I can really see that tension, because if you set up policies that are like, don't allow anything in ever, you aren't going to get anything done as a developer.
Correct. It's a fine balance to how do you filter out the noise and allow developers focus on, but also be able to understand how do you recognize what's not noise and things where you need to take action. So I think we'll constantly see refinement and improvements on the reduction of false positive type things. But again, I think you always have to have a balance. It's certain things you might have a high bar to clear, or a bar to clear where you say, okay, anything like this, and then or if you say if they're reachable or exploitable, then how do we understand that quicker, so we can make decisions faster on whether this thing is safe to use. Because then some of the difficult thing is, it's vulnerable in this context, it's not exploitable in this context, it is exploitable, but does that context come after the fact? So I think and then continuously scanning your environment to make sure that nothing after the fact, through either just through the natural process of time or the implementation, creates something that you weren't expecting.
I think we've hit on the crux of that question, that yes, it's still difficult and it is still improving, but we absolutely need, our security teams out there helping defend our developers, and we are all on the same team, right?
Absolutely, we're all in the same team. Yeah, and I said that the big thing we're trying to do is how do you codify? And this is where the dev teams or the DevOps teams can help with that. Is security people, they just want to make sure everything's secure. Right. So if we can help them express their security expertise and express that those checks and controls in code and in the process, then they're all very happy because they're getting out of what they want, and they don't like being bothered either, or felt that they're the cause of everything being slowed down. So if we can help them express their expertise and their security in automation, then I think it's a win-win it's actually a triple win-win for us in the DevOps worlds or platform worlds. It's a win for security, and it's a win for our dev teams, and ultimately it's a win for the customers.
Awesome. Well, I think we're about ready to close out. If there's any other questions in the audience, please post them. If I don't get to them in the last few minutes of our session here, we'll definitely reach out to you after. In closing, again, I said earlier that JFrog loves, the story with Fidelity. Can you share any insights on how, using JFrog products has helped your business? How, what kind of important parts have you recognized that, we just make a good partners here, especially in the security area?
Yeah, so I think I think the work, again, it's the whole development process has become much more symbiotic, and there's many points along the way that security needs to be guarded, right? I know we have the shift left, and I was talking to people last week, and we talked about shift left, and some people are kind of afraid of that sentiment, or that kind of making that so simple, and developers don't want the burden of everything. And I had the concept, well, you have to shift left, you have to shift middle, and shift right. And someone said they'll shift everywhere, right? So it's how do you build that into the end-to-end, and how do you have capabilities that are able to continuously monitor throughout the different points? And as we use things like X-ray or use Artifactory, to have a life cycle around your application artifact. So as you build it, you can scan it, and then there's a life cycle throughout with an artifact tree. If you're using your environments and you're using the release bundles, and you progress that artifact through ultimately to your desire to push it into production, you can X-Ray now has the ability to scan along the way. So you can, and you can have different policies and different controls and at the different points in time. And you can generate your SBOMs, and you can digitally sign at the appropriate time. So you can really leverage it in it's not a publish my artifact, pull my artifact. It's a much more now as part of ingrained into the life cycle of software delivery. So so we look forward to exploring how we can leverage it even more and reduce friction and toil and other efforts that developers might do in their pipelines, right? So if we can reduce the pipeline bloat and the amount of things that happen in the pipeline, again, that accelerates, that delivery, it's faster feedback. Developers are more focused on their business code versus all of this kind of what I call application infrastructure code. Yeah, and then the last part of it is looking forward to is how do we use it as a resiliency opportunity for production, and having availability, low latency as part of our the production deployments, or if we got operational dependencies, being able to have it play a role in making sure we got highly available and highly resilient applications that are always there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Gerard. I look forward to, partnering with you more in the future. I know even just our organizations, but even personally, I see you at conferences. Fidelity has quite the presence right now in many of the conferences that I've attended to and spoken at. I'm very impressed to see you there. And
thank you very much.
Very good to know you.
Likewise,
All right.
Look forward to the next time. Thank you, everybody.